Alright, slavery in the South. Southern slavery. Image here we have an auction house. Common in larger southern cities, um, and certainly common until just a little more than 150 years ago. So we're getting to some time periods that the history isn't that old. It might seem that old, but in the span of things, it's really not. So southern slavery, what's going on? Slavery in the United States initially begins, we've mentioned, with Native Americans. The people of Jamestown arrive as people start to settle the South. Uh, the initial thought is to put the Native Americans to work as slaves. What the Native Americans have on their side is the fact that they can just leave. They know the land, they know other places that they can go. So it's kind of hard to keep Native Americans in one spot, to keep them as slaves. So 1619, the first shipment of African slaves arrives in Virginia. And slavery, the slave trade, has been around for centuries. And the slaves that we're speaking of for the United States are coming from Africa, the colonies at first. So African slaves are coming over. In many cases, Africans are enslaved by other Africans. They're enslaved by warring tribes who capture their opponents and sell them off. Europeans, the Portuguese are great, famous slave traders. So Europeans buy these captured slaves on the coast, and often they trade them for weapons and other goods. This trade becomes known as triangle trade. Often it's just known as the triangle trade. There are two triangles, in fact. If you look here, the blue triangle goes from Africa to the West Indies. So slaves travel to the West Indies. And sugar and molasses, where the West Indies has a lot of sugar plantations. And that goes up to especially New England. And New England produces a great deal of rum and iron. We have some iron mines here. And that rum and iron goes back to Africa. The other triangle we have, the red triangle there, slaves going to the southern colonies. The southern colonies are sending those cash crops, tobacco, indigo, and rice, over to England, and England is sending produced goods like textiles and guns down to Africa. So we have these two triangles of trade. And while it looks very simple on a map and fairly sterile, the realities of this trade is pretty brutal. What's known as the Middle Passage is what they call this trip between Africa and the United States. And rapidly, this route grows. In 1690, 13,000 slaves were in North America. So 1690, only 13,000. By 1750, 60 years later, there were 200,000 African slaves in North America. And the Middle Passage that brought these slaves over, it was pretty brutal. The ships were very crowded because the more slaves could fit on the boat, the more the people selling them would make. For the most part, the slaves are held under the deck. The men working on the ships, they did not hesitate to whip and beat slaves. It was dirty. They weren't cleaning it, so there was blood and sweat and vomit and all sorts of bodily fluids everywhere. And disease spread very quickly. 20% of slaves on each ship died. That's an average. So some ships, the slaves made it out better, and on other ships, you have percentages that are up over 50% of slaves dying. they reach the South or the Indies, then they are sold to, for the most part, plantations. So 80 to 90% of slaves worked out in the fields. So you have cotton fields, tobacco fields, indigo fields. 10 to 20% of these slaves are cooking, cleaning, they're raising the children of the master. And full-time work begins at the age of 12, so very early on, children are expected to work. Since slaves are considered property, and uh, property when you're selling it, you don't really think about what goes with what. Families were often broken up to be sold. And it was a pretty brutal existence. We're going to be looking more on Monday, some of the realities and specifics of that existence. So we will go further in depth then. However, just to give you a sneak peek, slaves certainly resisted this life. Often I think we focus just on the brutal aspects, but it's very good to know that slaves were not just taking this and letting this life happen. There's a lot of resistance, a lot of people fleeing. They fake illnesses. Slaves are breaking tools, slowing down production to cost their masters money. And on Monday, we'll look at the Stono Rebellion, where we have a rebellion breaking out to help free the slaves.